Hello, welcome once again to the Dragon Plus livestream. I am your host, Bart Carroll, the Digital Marketing Manager here at Wizards of the Coast and the Dungeons & Dragons team. And with me, as he is every other week, Mr. Jeremy Crawford.
Hello, everyone.
Jeremy, of course, the lead rules designer of Dungeons & Dragons, the lead designer of the Player's Handbook, and the game's managing editor. So welcome back to the live stream.
I'm always happy to be here.
Just a quick bit of housekeeping. As the Dragon Plus live stream, we do have the latest issue of the Dragon Plus magazine now live on iOS, Android, and as always at dragonmag.com. So we did a little bit of a dive into Ghosts of Saltmarsh, a little bit of a dive. We'll be doing more in the next issue. We've got a Foibles and Quirks table from Richard Witters. We talk about some of the other live streaming going on throughout the community, so please do take a look. It's free, as always. If you have questions, suggestions, please do fill out the reader survey. We look at every answer every time. It helps shape future issues moving forward. So thank you all for reading. And we might have a bit of a topic to talk about, as folks were very eagerly awaiting at the, I'd say, the 11th hour of February. We did put out the Unearthed Arcana Artificer.
Yes. And this, of course, is a class that we experimented with a few years ago.
Yes.
We got playtest feedback from you all, and then we went back into the workshop and tinkered with the Artificer while also working, of course, on everything else we're working on.
No pun intended.
No, all my tinkering puns are intentional when it comes to the Artificer. This was for us a perfect time to give some focus to the Artificer over the past 6 months, because not only did we have that playtest feedback and we wanted to act on it, because people made it clear they wanted to see more of this class, but last year we released the PDF book Wayfinder's Guide to Eberron,
right.
And Artificers, for those of you who don't know, had their debut in Dungeons & Dragons in the original Eberron campaign setting book. Now, D&D has at various times had inventor-like characters.
Right.
The Eberron Artificer was not the first inventor character type to show up in the game.
Right.
But it was the first time we had this full official class, and that was about the fusion of magic and scientific invention. And that fusion is crucial to understanding the Artificer. Sometimes when we look at playtest feedback for this class, and this is not only true about the most recent version, but about every previous version of this class going back through 4th edition and also 3rd edition, sometimes people will come to the Artificer and expect it to just be like an engineer or a mechanic. That is not this class. The Artificer has always been, going back to its debut in 3rd edition Eberron, a wielder of magic, but a wielder of magic who channels that magic through various devices and objects, either that they make themselves or that they modify, or that they use essentially as almost like a material component in a spell. And so if you're holding your mind, it's almost like think of a mad scientist maybe in a steampunk story, but instead of steam being what's powering these amazing devices, it's magic. And that will give you sort of the feel that the Eberron Artificer has. And so that leads into the Artificer that we just released is much more than our previous version of the Artificer, grounded in the world of Eberron, which is why you'll see in the class there are references to the Last War, which is a major setting-defining event in the world of Eberron. And because we wanted to bring the Artificer back to its roots, to ground it more heavily in its home world, as I was working on this current version, I reached out to Keith Baker, the original creator of the world of Eberron, and had him go through the entire class with a fine-tooth comb and give suggestions on pretty much every single thing in the class. And so I can confidently say this has been vetted by Keith, and he and I worked together to to sort of reach a point where we could create a version of the class that expresses many of the storytelling tropes in Eberron, while also being flexible enough that the class could be used in other worlds. And that's why on the very first page of the class, we even talk about artificers who appear in other worlds of the D&D multiverse.
And again, really quickly for folks, perhaps, I'm assuming many of you are already familiar with Unearthed Arcana and the latest Artificer, but if for those who are not, you can go to the D&D website right now. Just take a look in Unearthed Arcana for the latest article and download the PDF. It's about it's a 10-page document, so it's pretty juicy, as you would say.
Yes.
Artificer.
Yeah, it is juicy. There is a lot here. And in fact, I had so much I was designing that I broke out some of it, and the rest of it will come in a future Unearthed Arcana, which we hinted at when we did this release. I have to say I was having so much fun designing this class that, as often happens when you kind of get in the zone designing something, it's like, I just designed twice as many things than I had expected to. But we'll talk more about that later in the show.
So here's what I think we should do. I had my goofball questions about your Girl Scout cookie ranking and what the Bartificer class would do, but let's punt those completely out of here.
Thin mints.
That's
number one, but only if they're coming out of the freezer. I love frozen Thin Mints.
I hate the mint chocolate. See, that's the bottom of my list. The correct answer is s'mores. The new s'mores cookie.
That's not the answer for me, my friend.
And how come they don't do a chocolate chip Girl Scout cookie? I think I would enjoy those.
Oh, yeah.
See, we've already gone on sidetrack.
Yeah.
But
I'm sure an artificer could invent a solution. A cookie dispensing device.
Ooh, or a cookie converting device.
Yes.
You put in your garbage Thin Mints, and out pops a chocolate chip cookie.
Yes. So all you Artificer players out there, I want you to use one of your infusions to create an alchemy jug, and then work with your DM to modify that jug to dispense cookies.
I'm wildly in love with this magic item right now.
Yes.
That's, so we'll do a survey maybe of the Artificer of the class and how it came together. Touch upon some of the key elements of it, and then if you do have questions, we've already grabbed a few from Twitter as well, specifically about the Artificer. Please do put it in chat. Please do preface it with question. I see TK has joined the fray, is running the first of our 2 raffles again. What we'd like to do more regularly as a thanks for everyone who's taken the time to view us live is to run a couple of raffles throughout the live stream. I think the first one is going to be for a copy of the Dungeon Master Screen and Reincarnated and Tactical Maps Reincarnated. And then a little later at the second half of the show, we're going to give away a copy of Dungeon of the Mad Mage. Again, if you have questions, please put it in chat. But if you wouldn't mind, perhaps walk us or introduce us a bit to this Artificer. As you mentioned, there were previous versions. I suppose, tell me if this is true or not, you could go way, way back to sort of the Alchemist class that was in early issues of Dragon Magazine as maybe a precursor to some of the design philosophies that led here, and certainly Eberron and its thematic elements. Yeah,
again, we, in the last 2 versions of the Artificer, we have wanted to both express the Eberron version of the class, but also a broader character archetype of the magical maker.
Right.
And both of those goals are still present in this new version of the Artificer, with just us amplifying the volume on the Eberron piece.
Sure.
Because one of the reasons for that was not only the release of the Wayfinder's Guide, as I mentioned, but also in the playtest feedback we got to the previous Artificer, a note that we got a lot was people just didn't feel there was enough of the Eberron Artificer in the Artificer we had created. Like we had, essentially the message we got is we had gone a little too generic. And so with this design, we're going harder into what you'd expect from the Artificers, not only that have appeared in Eberron, but also Artificers we would like to see appear in Eberron.
So it's kind of interesting because I know that you have sort of expounded upon the idea that story should and must inform the mechanics of the game.
Absolutely.
And in this case, the story being the campaign setting of Eberron, whether or not you are playing an Eberron, it's still very much informing the character class of the Artificer.
Yes, because we want all of our classes to feel grounded in our worlds. And this class is unusual among our classes in that it is so heavily associated with one of our worlds, and that world being Eberron. But as the article points out, if you're not playing an Eberron, let's say you're playing in the Forgotten Realms, you could still most definitely play an Artificer. We have an entire island in FR, the island of Lanten, that is just begging for members of this class to appear.
Well, they're artificers who says they couldn't have opened a planar gate in one of their experiments and crossed from Eberron into the Forgotten Realms. They need a way back. They need, or they've intentionally gone exploring. So yeah, many ways that it could be implemented, but having that Eberron background seems like it informs the class heavily.
Very much. But again, only sort of directionally. There's nothing in the mechanics of the class itself that requires anything that is in that setting. But again, we wanted to make sure this class felt at home in its primary home. So what we're going for with the Artificer, and in addition to this idea of the magical inventor, is also the Artificer has always been about going, and this goes all the way back to 3rd edition, tremendous versatility. One of the things that I kept sort of repeating to myself as I was making different design decisions, and I would bring it up in conversations with Keith Baker, and then he would bring it up with me, is the Artificer needed to have a level of versatility that in many cases would surpass the versatility of our other classes. We might have other classes that do a particular thing better than the Artificer, but we want the Artificer to be that person in the party where if you give them enough time, they can often come up with the right tool for the job. That they are the ones who are going to MacGyver the situation. They might not have the solution ready in that moment, but give them a little bit, and either they know a guy, or they are that person, and they will put together a solution, or maybe in a few levels they'll be able to provide the solution that the group is looking for.
So if you're a player interested in playing this class, how might you mitigate the idea that it is a background support class, that they're not going to be involved in the fray?
So that is a great question. First off, support for many of us players, and now I'm taking my game designer hat off. Well, I always have my game designer hat on, but I'm also putting on my gamer hat to talk about people's tastes.
We need to make actual hats now.
That's right. We can switch off hats. So one of the things we know from the tons and tons and tons of playtest data we have about 5th edition, and this goes all the way back to the D&D Next playtest, is that there are many players for whom being a support character is not being a background character. It is actually a mistake to think those two are the same thing. If a person calls a support character a background character, all that is an indication to me as a game designer is the person saying that does not like playing a support character. And so to them, a support character is a background character. Now, those of us who like playing support characters, and I am one of those people, like even in, not only in D&D do I often play characters like clerics, or I play very sort of problem-solving wizards, but also even when I play many like online RPGs, I am often the person in the group playing the healer. I don't think of myself as playing a background character. I think of myself as playing a pivotal character who is supporting the success of the group. And so for certain player types, playing that kind of supportive character is their bliss. It's not for everybody. But that is then why the versatility of the Artificer is fantastic, because what we did is we built in options so that if, let's say, being a support character is not your bliss, this class has enough options that you could turn your Artificer into a pretty formidable damage dealer. But on the flip side, if you love support, especially if in this version of the class you pick the Alchemist,
yes,
you can also be a very formidable support character. And so we made it so that you could push your character in the direction that you wanted it to be. But definitely, support is in the DNA of this class. Part of that is you see it in its spell list. You see it in some of the other options in the class. There are healing abilities here, buffing abilities. Abilities the wizard does not have. And the reason why I bring up the wizard is the wizard is one of our other supremely versatile characters. The artificer, in contrast to the wizard, can occupy a space that is sort of between, spellcasting-wise, the wizard on one hand and a cleric or bard on the other. And the bard is also, of course, another class with versatility as one of its identifying factors. So what else then, you might be wondering, sets the artificer apart? Because we do have some other characters in the game who are versatile.
Yes.
We also have some characters who can provide support, and we also have characters who can bring the boom. And yes, definitely the artificer can bring the boom. I mean, the artillerist.
That's who I was looking at when you were mentioning the action for subclass, subtype.
The artillerist, especially with some of the spells that you get as a part of that subclass, are some of the biggest boom spells of the game. And even the alchemist has some meaty damage options, like Cloud Kill, which is devastating, but even some lower level ones that can definitely hold their own. But again, we have other characters in the game who can bring the big boom. We also have other characters in the game who have versatility. What none of those characters have that the artificer has is the ability to make stuff. Really, it wouldn't be an artificer if an artificer wasn't making things.
Right.
And when I say that, I mean making things in several different ways. There is the most sort of basic, mundane version of making things, which is crafting. And the artificer is better at crafting than anyone else in the game, especially in their areas of specialty. They get benefits to make it so that it is more efficient for them to make certain items than other people. So already, crafting, okay, that's a part of it. Also, they have the ability to make certain magic items lickety-split for free, an ability no other class in the game has. No other class in the game can just say, oh, you want a bag of holding? Here you go. You know, there are certain things in the game that people, you know, they go on adventures looking for them. They're hoping the DM will provide it to them. Well, some of those magic items, the artificer can just provide them. Now, the magic item list for the artificer does not include artifacts or some of the other major aspirational items.
Sure.
You still need to go on adventures for those. But some of those quality of life items, those really fun items that help you solve problems in unusual ways, a lot of those are on the list of items that an artificer can replicate. But there's more when it comes to making things in the world. Each artificer subclass that's in this document also has some manifestation of their subclass that they can deploy in the world. With the artillerist, it is these magic-infused turrets. And with the alchemist, it is the Alchemical Homunculus.
Yes.
Which, by the way, is a nod to the original Artificer in 3rd edition, because back in 3rd edition, every Artificer could make a homunculus. And so back then, an Artificer was every single Artificer in 3rd edition could make a pet-like thing. Right now, that is inside the Alchemist, partly also because of folklore in the real world about, you know, medieval alchemists making homunculi.
I was going to say, I love the real world background of the homunculus.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a guy that lives in your head, and that's, that's the homunculus.
And so, yeah, for those of you who might be wondering, why the Alchemical Homunculus? It comes from, it's a mix of the original Artificer being able to make a homunculus, but also real world folklore about alchemists making homunculi, but also things like golems. So we felt this was a great place for you to give you the ability to make this critter, which, if you haven't read the text carefully, I encourage you to see that we really urge you to come up also with what your homunculus looks like. It might look like the homunculus in the monster manual, but it also might be a little cauldron with wings, or it might be, it might be a potion dispenser of some kind. You get to decide, you get to customize what this thing looks like that has this list of different magical abilities that it can confer on people. Just as over in the Artillerist, the turret can be one of 3 types. You'll notice there's a theme here. This goes back to what I was talking about at the beginning, versatility. That's why, unlike in a lot of our classes where we'll just give you something, it just does one thing and you're out, part of the identity of the Artificer is making fun choices. Sometimes those choices are what we call ribbons, and other times they are really important, meaty choices. Talking about ribbons, and also talking about choice, right at first level, I designed this ability called Magical Tinkering.
So for folks following along, we are on page 2, and also a shout out for Pelham, as always, manning things over there. Really quickly, I just want to say, A, I am impressed with your ability to pronounce Alchemical Homunculus over and over again without tripping up on that. And B, if folks in the chat have their own suggestions for what their homunculus looks like, I would love to see it, and we'll compile a really cool, fun table throughout at the end of this. So yes, and again, we are taking questions. There's a lot of questions. I know we're not going to get to all of them today. We just sort of cracked open the conversation about the Alchemist, but we will be compiling them and perhaps looking to follow up with the Q&A a little bit more in a follow-up discussion. So sorry for interrupting, but you were talking about the level 1 magical tinkering.
Yes. So that angle of choice and of making things in the world, I wanted to embed it right there in first level. So right when you take this class, whether it's your first class or you're multi-classing into it, right away you gain the ability to do this thing that is central to the Artificer's identity, and that is infusing magic into different items out in the world. Magical tinkering is also special in that it is the only prestidigitation-like ability we've put in the game where the duration of the things you produce with it is indefinite. With prestidigitation, thaumaturgy, and the like, those things that you create all have a limited duration. Not so with magical tinkering, where you could make this thing and it, as said in the feature, lasts indefinitely. And that was a fun change we made so that you really felt like I can literally just, poof, make a thing. You'll also see on that first page having to do with the theme of invention, tinkering, options. Right above magical tinkering on the page is a sidebar that talks about firearm proficiency.
Yes.
In the Dungeon Master's Guide, we have rules not only for using Renaissance firearms, but also for using laser guns.
Yes, as we discussed last year, leading into the Barrier Peaks discussion.
Yeah, Barrier Peaks, which are also mentioned in this article, by the way.
Yes, I did see that.
I thought of you when I wrote those words.
I appreciated that.
So not every D&D group wants firearms to show up in their group. That was a message we got loud and clear in response to the last version of the Artificer, where we had an entire subclass called the Gunsmith.
Right.
And it was a very clear message that the community was not comfortable with guns being sort of directly embedded in an option that might be used throughout D&D. So what we did here is we moved it into the optional space, because there definitely are groups that use guns.
Yes.
I do in my group. And we wanted to make sure that that option was still here, because if you are in a setting where firearms are in use, artificers would absolutely be proficient with them. And if any of you are wondering if any of the later features that interact with weapons, if they were designed to interact with firearms, the answer is an emphatic yes. So if any of you are hoping to recreate the aesthetic of a gunslinger like you did with the gunsmith, you can do that quite easily actually by making use of the firearm proficiency that is here, and then using that weapon as the focus for a lot of the magic that you get elsewhere in this class. So speaking of magic, let's talk about the Artificer's spellcasting, because their spellcasting, again, appropriate to a class that has always been pretty eccentric, they have a purposefully eccentric approach to spellcasting. And here's what I mean by that when I talk about its eccentricity.
And we're on page 3, I believe, and we'll be moving on to page 4.
The Artificer, as a spellcaster, has a spell slot progression, which we refer to as a half-caster progression. It's the progression used by the Paladin and the Ranger, but unlike those classes, the Artificer gets spell slots and cantrips at first level. That was a very intentional design choice. The Artificer is not like any of our other classes, actually, when it comes to their relationship to the magic that they wield. And we wanted them to have some of their magical toolkit right away, because that is such a defining aspect of the class and always has been. Back in 3rd edition, their spellcasting ability is actually what was called infusions. So we've actually changed in the current version how the word infusion is used. But for those of you who've been an Eberron fan like I have since its introduction many years ago, what used to be called their infusions, we now call spellcasting, but it is functionally the same, because in the old days, Artificers, they cast spells, but it was flavored in such a way that it was always described as, well, they are tinkering with something to create the spell effect.
Right.
So that was something we wanted to preserve in this new version of the class, that idea of spellcasting including tinkering. And that is why Artificers, unlike any of our other spellcasters, must have a spellcasting focus to cast their spells. And their spellcasting focus, rather than it being the usual things that our other classes use, like staffs, which many of our classes use, or holy symbols, or orbs, they use the artisan's tools that they are proficient with, or their thieves' tools, because Artificers, and this also goes all the way back to their origins, have proficiency with thieves' tools. Because in addition to rogues, these tinkerers should also be skilled at dealing with traps and locks and whatnot.
Yes.
So Artificers, they channel their magic through their tools. And then later at 2nd level, they also gain the ability to use any item that bears one of their infusions. They can also use it as a spellcasting focus. We've included a sidebar called the Magic of Artifice in the class that encourages you as an Artificer player to have a ball thinking about what is going on when your Artificer is casting spells. Because remember, your Artificer is getting out alchemist supplies or smith's tools. If you have proficiency in calligrapher's tools, you could even be using your calligraphy set. Whatever you're doing, whether it's you're quickly scribbling something on a piece of paper, or you're screwing something, or you're uncorking one of the vials in your alchemist supplies and the magic is pouring out, whatever you're doing when you cast spells, you are doing it through these tools. And that means when other people see an Artificer casting spells, they'll often actually think they're not casting spells at all. They'll think, oh my gosh, that magic is coming out of that vial, when in fact the Artificer is casting a spell, but in a way unlocking the magic through the vial, through the screwdriver, or whatever it is that the Artificer is using for the spell casting. Now I want to pause for a moment on this ability to then later use an item that has one of your infusions as your spellcasting focus. when at level 2 you get the Infuse Item ability,
Yes.
you not only get the ability to replicate certain magic items, but you also get access to an array of infusions that you can choose from, not unlike the Eldritch invocations that we give the Warlock. Among these options for infusions are things like causing one of your weapons to have +1 to attack rolls and damage rolls. What this means for your spell casting is if you use, for example, let me jump to the infusions. You don't have to go to them if you don't want, Pelham. If you take, for example, the Enhanced Weapon infusion and you put it on a simple or martial weapon, you can now use that weapon as your spellcasting focus, including, if you use the optional rule for firearms, the gun you're firing. And so that's what I was getting at earlier, that if you want to still have somebody who is firing crazy magical effects out of a gun, you can do that right here with this Artificer. And that is, in fact, if you are a viewer of Acquisitions Incorporated, that is what the NPC Vi does. She is an Artificer, and she uses her rifle. And you will notice in the show, she has done a variety of things through her rifle. And all of those things basically are a form of Artificer spellcasting.
It seems like a fun way to, in a way, here's the Marvel superheroes. Which one is your character like? Well, Hawkeye might be not just a ranger, but could be an artificer that's using a variety of, delivering spells in this fashion. So.
Yeah. Now, there's another really neat thing hanging out inside the Artificer spellcasting feature. And that is, Artificers have, and it's funny to say this because you'd think this would be a fairly common thing maybe in the game, but it isn't. Artificers, when they level up, can actually swap out a cantrip. Most classes, actually all the other classes, when they learn their cantrips, it's for life. It's essentially a form of embedded magic within them. Not so with our class that is all about versatility and invention. Artificers, every time you level up, you're like, no, I now have that cantrip instead. This fits in with the whole tinkering angle because remember, since cantrips are spells, they also are always cast through one of the Artificer's tools. So you can imagine that when an Artificer is learning a new cantrip, it might actually be that the Artificer is tinkering with that strange device he or she always has with them, and they might have an aha moment, and now that strange device produces the message cantrip, whereas before it was firing out firebolts.
Right. Very, very Doc Brown feel, right? He's got wild hair about a study that they're interested in, and now they've gone in that experimental route.
Yeah.
And the thing that captivated them just a month before, they're no longer into electricity, now they're into time travel, and it comes out in their spells.
Exactly.
So, interesting.
Another thing that might be of interest about the design of Artificer spellcasting is that for quite a while in the design, we had them having spells known as opposed to preparing spells. We switched it pretty late actually in the design to prepared spells because we realized given how many of the spells on the spell list are of a utility nature, we wanted Artificers to have the ability to access those tools when they needed to, and not have to be like, well, in 10 levels, or in 1 level, or whatever the duration is, I will be able to access that spell. It's like, nope, let me sleep on it, and in the morning, I will have that spell available to you. So again, preparing spells is a part of this theme of tinkering and right tool for the right job.
Sure, it's very Scotty.
Yes.
Here's a problem. Let me research a solution and get back to you, Captain.
Also, if anyone is missing from the previous version the Artificer's ability to easily detect magic or identify things, that is actually still here because since Artificers now prepare their spells, and also I gave them the ritual casting ability, any day on which you want your Artificer to be able to identify things or detect magic, just make sure you prepare those spells, and you can also cast them as rituals, meaning it's not going to eat up one of your spell slots to do so. And it's funny, actually, we had until fairly late in the design the ability to, basically you got those spells for free, but that was when it was a spells known class. But as soon as it became a spells prepared class, it wasn't necessary to have that as a separate feature, particularly because this class already has so much going on in it. All right, let's keep going as we sort of do a flyover.
Sure. Can I ask a quick question about the playtest process then? Have you, and this just struck me when you mentioned that, have you ever considered A/B testing, where you would have an artificer go out that is spells known, an artificer goes out that is spells prepared, to see how it fits? Or is it more of a case of, we're going to have to go down one road eventually, this is the one we feel is correct, but let's put it out for play testing and kind of make sure of it?
So we do a version of A/B testing sometimes when we released out into the public different versions of something, which we actually have done with this class. Because for us, design is not one directional. We might get the feedback and then decide there was something in the old version we want to snatch and marry with something in the new version as we study the playtest feedback, as we continue to tinker with this. We went back and forth on spells known and spells prepared for a little while. And so in a way, we were bouncing between A and B quite a bit. And what really helped stick it for us on spells prepared was James Wyatt, who came in to do a little help toward the end. He did a very important thing anytime you're designing a class for D&D, and that is simply he tried making a character. And he was delighted, he was having a ball, which was important to me because James, along with Keith Baker, was one of the people who worked on the original Eberron setting. So it was crucial to me that James and Keith both be happy with this class in its current state. And his big feedback was, I love what I have here, but I want to be able to prepare my spells because, I can predict some of the solutions my artificer is going to want to have maybe for the first few problems that come at me, but you never know what's beyond that.
Right.
And spells prepared gives you the flexibility to adapt over the course of an adventure. Now let's talk about Infuse Item just a little more. I've touched on it already. This is your ability to quickly make magic items, whether they are the magic items in the Dungeon Master's Guide or they are these sort of special artificer magic items that you create with an infusion like Boots of the Winding Path or the Many-Handed Pouch. I am looking forward to all sorts of shenanigans in various campaigns with people using the Many-Handed Pouch. I think it's going to be especially good for groups that like to get into heist-like trouble.
Anytime you're messing with extra-dimensional, interdimensional spaces, then yes, shenanigans can ensue.
with people being able to reach into that space and store things in that space. Yeah, the storytelling possibilities are pretty marvelous. One of the nice things for the Artificer about the magic items that are created with it is that if those items require attunement, the Artificer can instantly attune themselves to the item when they first infuse the magic into it. So that is a way in which the Artificer is better at attuning to things than other people, but it's specifically the items that the Artificer makes. If the Artificer gives it to somebody else and that item requires attunement, the person will have to attune to it using the normal rules in the Dungeon Master's Guide. Now, one of the features that the Artificer had in its previous incarnation was this increasing schedule of I can attune to now an extra item, and yet another item, and yet another item. The playtest feedback we got on that is people were kind of amused by it, but it was not viewed as central to the class, and it also, over the course of the levels, had the potential to create some balance headaches.
Sure.
And we realized, given the number of items that don't require attunement on the replicate magic item list, that it was not actually necessary for the Artificer to have additional attunements and still be able to enjoy the items they can make with their Infuse Item feature. So it ended up being a redundant feature, a glimmer of which is still in the 20th level feature of the class, Soul of Artifice, which is totally bonkazonks. We look forward to your playtest feedback on it, where you suddenly are able to attune to 6 items, and you get a +1 bonus to saving throws per item you're attuned to. Give us your feedback. We'll see what we do with that one. We are often willing to do crazy things at 20th level that we don't do at other levels because of the threats that you often face. And 20th level is meant to be sort of your ride into the sunset feeling awesome level.
Sure.
Assuming you don't die in a blaze of glory. But again, playtesting will help determine the final form, not only of that 20th level feature, but of all of the features in the class.
That's a good housekeeping point as well. You mentioned the playtest feedback. So the Unearthed Arcana Artificer went up on Thursday of last week. As we traditionally do, we give it at least a couple of days to get out into the community before we even put up the playtest survey. So do look for the playtest survey link to be made available in the coming days. That will be on the D&D website. It's not there yet, but by all means, we hope that you've downloaded the Unearthed Arcana, you're taking a look at it, you're implementing it in your games, and the survey will be there shortly.
All right, shall I keep going?
Sure. We do have plenty of questions. As mentioned, we'll probably be collecting a lot of them, at least for this episode of the Dragon Plus live stream. We've got questions on Counterspell against the Artificer. Questions on how much.
Before I continue, hit me with that counterspell question.
Okay.
This will be easy. I think I know what this question is going to be.
It's basically asking, I missed it here, but how would Counterspell interact if you're trying to mess up an Artificer's spellcasting or creative process?
Right.
If you're timing it correctly, could you screw up what they're trying to do?
Absolutely.
Oh.
So the spellcasting ability of the Artificer does not explicitly say that you're not spellcasting. And so when the Artificer casts a spell, they still fulfill the trigger requirement for the counterspell. Counterspell does, now if counterspell said something like only if the spellcasting looks like X, or if certain, only if somatic components are present, then there might be something for us to hang that on of it shutting counterspell off, or rather making counterspell not possible. But yeah, the Artificer is still casting spells in an unusual way, certainly, and to the uninitiated, as I said, they will often think, oh, that woman is not even casting spells. But if a person is high enough level to cast counterspell, and the spell has a perceivable component, they know a spell is being cast. You can fool the baker in the village, but you're not going to fool that wizard in the tower.
How about a disable device attempt on an Artificer's creative process? Could you use your thieves' tools to in a similar counterspell way?
On the spell casting? No.
Because there's that mechanical component that...
Only in the instant of spell casting.
Okay.
Yeah. It's basically going to be too late. If the rogue is running, if a rogue or another Artificer is running up with their thieves' tools, the spell is, by the time they got there, the spell has already been cast.
Yes. Oh yes, sorry, here it is. That was AG Hill 91, so thank you for that question. Question on the empty levels. Alcana asks, there's a few empty levels where they get nothing except extra spells or things of that nature. Are there plans to address that, and again, just kind of to marry it to another question that I saw come in, what is the future of the iterative process for the Artificer? So
we will get feedback, and we will start tinkering based on the feedback that we get. Mm-hmm. If people overwhelmingly like something, we are going to protect that piece of the design. Whereas if there's something that is unsatisfying, we will do everything we can to make it more satisfying. Mm-hmm. As for levels where you don't see a feature in the feature column, for a spellcaster, those levels are not empty if the spellcaster is getting more spells.
Right.
And that is a principle of our class design you will see in the spellcasting classes in the player's handbook. So yeah, go ahead and take a look at the classes there, and you will see levels just like that in the player's handbook, where the feature often that the spellcaster is getting at that level is they're getting more spells.
Oh, yes, more spells, more infusions. They certainly are not entirely the dead level of addition spells.
And if anything, we have to make sure we're not getting carried away with how much candy we're giving to the spellcaster, because if they're getting especially great spell options at a particular level, we don't want to also, and then you also get this feature that's the best in the world, and it's like that is a lot, because as soon as spellcasting is in the mix, that is a major piece of the class when it comes to the options available to it. And when you have the versatility of the Artificer, that is a really important piece of the class's capabilities. But this class also has some really meaty capabilities in its subclasses. Those come in at 3rd level, along with the tool expertise ability, which gives you expertise with the tools that you're proficient with. And then you get to decide if you're going to be an alchemist or an artillerist. Each of these subclasses gives you a feature at 3rd level called Tools of the Trade. It gives you the proficiencies with the tools you'd expect a member of this subclass to have.
Yes.
Because we want to make sure that these subclasses feel like they belong in the world, that they're not just a package of combat mechanics, but they also serve a purpose in the broader world. And so that's one of the reasons for them having these tool proficiencies. But also then, this expands the list of things that these artificers can use as a spellcasting focus. So the alchemist, when they get their alchemist supplies, well, bam, that's now something they can cast spells through. Also, with Tools of the Trade, you become especially good at crafting a particular kind of magic item. With the alchemist, it is potions, as you would expect.
Yes.
And with the artillerist, who is a master of using big booms on the battlefield, it is wands, because in the world of Eberron, wands are essentially the sidearms of artificers. And so that's why the artillerist, while they're going to be out there on the battlefield unleashing fireballs and shatter and thunder waves, and also hurling out their turrets, well, they also need something for fighting closer distance, and that's what their sidearm is for, aka their wand.
Bruce Campbell would support this highly.
Yes. Then each of the subclasses gets its spell list expanded. And one of the things you will notice as you study these two spell lists and then study them next to the spell list for the whole class is that each subclass gets a number of their damage spells in their subclass list. Because the Artificer list is a treasure trove of the game's best utility spells. Again, fitting with the identity of the base class. Here in the subclasses, we're able to give you damage spells that are themed to what that type of artificer is great at. So this is why the alchemist gets spells that primarily deal with poison and acid.
Stinking Cloud, Cloud Kill, things of that
Melts
nature.
Acid Arrow, whereas the artillerist gets big explosions.
Right. There's your Fireball.
Yes. Now, the artillerist list on purpose is much more about those big damage spells because the alchemist is pushing much harder in the expert support character, and the artillerist, as you'd expect for someone called an artillerist, is going in the direction of ranged magical combat. Now, the alchemist also has something very special on its list that no other artificer has, and that is the Raise Dead spell, which again, you'd expect for an alchemist if you're looking at the real world's folklore about alchemy and being able to use it to bring somebody back from the dead.
Oh, there's a fantastic Korean series on Netflix right now that involves that very sort of facet where there's an alchemist that is using a plant and the dead are raised, but not always in a good way.
And that also ties into the alchemist giving life to the alchemical homunculus that they create. You'll see, and then also later at 6th level, the alchemist becomes a very adept healer. And so you'll start seeing that even though the alchemist, yes, can fry people with acid or poison them with poison, also the alchemist is well equipped to keep people alive and to bring them back to life.
On the other hand, I'm delighted to see the artillerist has Wall of Force as one of their higher level spells.
Yes.
And that feels very much exactly as you were saying. I'm going to use my tools, my crafting to create this magical effect. And sort of not only am I firing out, but I'm defending my tower as well in a way.
And when I was coming up with these lists, and especially the artillerist list, I put Wall of Force on there partly because I was imagining the role the artillerists must have played in the last war in Eberron, and thinking that they weren't just there to launch huge explosions at the other side,
Right.
but they would also be masters at using their magic to defend their emplacement, the place where they are launching those attacks from.
There's another artillerist out there aiming at us. So what does our person do?
Or also, I've designed the artillerists so that they are also the master at, let's say you're in a dungeon and your party has been backed into a room that has 2 doors into it. Well, Wall of Force over that door, hope everyone comes through that one, have your turret down, and just mow them down. So the artillerist is meant to have a tactical versatility to fit this theme. And then if the foes get in close, the artillerist has their sidearm, their wand, to whip out and defend themselves and their friends. The alchemist then, and oh boy, we're almost out of time.
I knew this was going to be a good discussion, and we will pick it up next time for sure. Absolutely.
The alchemist then has the homunculus that can do a number of wondrous things, but we will dig more into that next time. We will also take way more of your questions.
Yes.
And there's also the question of what else is coming, because we hinted at that. I mentioned that I designed more than we wanted to include all-in-one Unearthed Arcana. So we have more coming for the Artificer. One of the things I've already teased on Twitter that we are going to be doing is we are going to expand the Artificer's spell list to also include appropriate spells from Xanathar's Guide to Everything. So expect to see that, and expect to see us exploring some more angles of this very rich character archetype, because the Artificer not only in Eberron, but in other parts of the D&D multiverse, has a variety of very fun roles that it can fill.
So, we'll leave it there. We're getting close to the top of the hour. We're going to switch over to Heroes of the Veil quite shortly. But we hope you enjoyed our initial look at the Unearthed Arcana Artificer Revisited. I know we were excited to receive the class. We hope you are as well. We hope that you're playtesting it at the moment. I missed my chance. This weekend I was away. I was playing through the Lost Laboratory of Qualish with a gaming group, and I should have brought the Artificer with me and tested it out then. But next time for sure. Because this is a class that falls very much into my personal wheelhouse. So looking forward to using it. So again, so thank you, Mr. Crawford, for introducing a bit of the Artificer. Well, not introduce, but go the first part of the discussion. We'll be back again with Jeremy in a couple of weeks. But until then, thanks as always to all of our viewers, our subscribers, and followers. Thank you to our moderators. Including TK, who was running the sweepstakes today. Congratulations to our 2 winners. We'll get these out to you ASAP. Next week, we will be back talking to Jim Zub and Jeremy in 2 weeks' time. So we'll look forward to continuing this conversation then.
Yeah, great to see you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone, and stick around for Heroes of the Veil.